Hi, it's Professor Malone again, and welcome to Photo Basics Part 1, Understanding the Camera, Film, and Exposure. In our previous two videos, we discussed the four components that come together in order to form a good exposure, which is your available light, the film or ISO number, aperture, and shutter speed. This particular video, we're going to talk about aperture in a bit more detail. So, what is aperture? Aperture is something that has to do with your lens. What is it? It has to do with your lens's opening. Okay, so ISO, if you're shooting with a film camera, is a designation given to the film. If you're shooting with a digital camera, it is something that you can change on the body of the camera. Aperture is something pertaining specifically to the lens that you are using. So if you have a variety of lenses, you may find that your aperture options change from lens to lens. So aperture and exposure. The aperture is part of the lens. I think we've said that. The smaller the f-stop number, the larger the opening of the aperture. So f-stop and aperture can be used interchangeably. They mean more or less the same thing. The f-stop number, okay, usually 2.8, 4, 5.68, 11, 16, 22. Depending on your camera, you may have numbers that go lower than that or higher than that. But the smaller the f-stop number, the more light that passes through the lens. So for example, at a 2.8, you see that the lens is open really wide, allowing a lot of light to come through and hit either your film or your digital sensor. And then here at f22, we've got only a little bit of light coming through, hitting the film or digital sensor. It's the same image that's going to be recorded, but because of the f-stop number, there's going to be a difference in the way that image looks. So rather than try to explain it to you, let's have some visual examples. So, when we look at an image and we see something like this, like the beginning part of the image is in extreme focus, but the background is blurry. That is an example of f-stop or aperture. And this is an example of using a smaller number or wider opening. What happens is more light is coming through, but because there's so many light rays coming through, the overall image is a lot less focused. Except for the one part that you're focusing on, the overall image has a softer feel. Okay, when you're letting through only a small amount of light rays using a larger number, then more of the image is in focus. So let's see an example of that. I think I like this example right here, right? So at f-stop 1.8, we're focusing on the center of the rose, or this photographer, I should say, is focusing on the center of the rose. The rest of the image is blurry. At 5.0, focusing on the center of the rose, more of the image is in focus. And then getting smaller and smaller, more of the image is in focus, all the way down to f22. Another example is right here. If we look, this photographer is keeping the camera focused on this middle section of the image. And at f2.8, only this middle section is in focus. The foreground and background are blurry. Here, the foreground and background are blurry, but not as much as before. Here, we're getting more and more in focus, and here, only the very edges of the image are out of focus. All right, and see, this is going to f32. So depending on your lens will depend on the number options you have. Okay. But here's another example of keeping the focus on this middle bead, all right? And this photographer, okay, so this is another good example because, as you can see, the overall quality of light is not changing from image to image, even though in this image, a larger f-stop or smaller f-stop number, larger opening, is going to let in more light. They're compensating by changing the shutter speed. So 1/60th of a second is a rather fast shutter speed at ISO 400, whereas here we're at half a second. Half a second is a really slow it's not really slow, but it's a slower shutter speed at f11. So less light is coming in, so we're going to need to slow the shutter speed in order to keep the same quality of light in the image. Here we're at f32, meaning we've really closed down our f-stop to a really small hole, so only a little tiny bit of light is coming through, and to compensate, the shutter is staying open for an entire 2.5 seconds. Okay, so the ISO has stayed the same, the f-stop is changing, and to keep the same quality of light, we have to compensate by increasing the shutter speed through the images. I also took a few images to kind of illustrate this. Okay, so once again, it's a matter of the object's distance from the lens of the camera. So for these images, I also kept the same quality of light. I shot everything at ISO 800, okay? And my first image is at 1/40th of a second. I'm not using a tripod, I'm using my table as a tripod, so the camera's more or less still. But you'll see as the exposures get longer, there's a little bit of a shake to the camera. So this is at f2.8. Okay, here at 5.6 ISO 800, we are at, I'm sad to say I really can't see what that number is from where I'm sitting because I need my glasses. Okay, so next we're at 1/3 of a second at f-stop 10 ISO 800. Here we're at 1.3 seconds at f-stop 18 ISO 800. Okay, so here you see I can keep my camera completely still for 2 whole seconds. F-stop 22 ISO 800. So as you can see, my sugar bowl in the background is getting blurrier and blurrier as the ISO gets wider. Okay, same quality of light, but my sugar bowl slowly comes into focus the smaller I make my aperture. Using the same pictures, alright, now I put my ISO at 1600, okay, f-stop is 2.8, and I'm going to keep my shutter speed the same, 1/125th of a second, so this is a faster shutter speed. At 1/125th of a second, at f2.8, ISO 1600, this is the image I get. Keeping my shutter speed the same, but letting in less light at f5.6, we see that now my image, it has the same shallow depth of field, but it's now darker because less light has come in. At f13, same depth of field if you can even tell, but once again, less light is coming in. It's a very dark image. And then at f22, we can barely see anything. So what I want you to do at this particular moment is find the f-stop or aperture control on your camera. If you're a little confused as to where this is, Google your camera model, Google how to find aperture and how to change it. If you're using an SLR, you should be in manual mode so that you can change the dials and stuff. If you're not using an SLR, you may not be able to change your aperture. So definitely look in your instruction manual, find a PDF online if you've lost your instruction manual, make sure you can even change the aperture, and then play around with it a little bit, okay? Good luck.